Okay, so yesterday, I kind of got this far in the lecture on Chinese belief systems and was kind of talking about the effects of Confucianism on Chinese society. And I really got cut off here at the end. So just to kind of finish this thought before we move on and explore Taoism, um, we also want to kind of look at within the five relationships that Confucianism preached, right? That there's always a superior, and if the superior acts morally, then the inferior should follow, and this will bring order to society and kind of restore the glory of China. Um, but within this relationship, we need to also really point out the social ramifications in the sense that women in the five relationships were always inferior, right? They were inferior to their husband, they were inferior to their parents, they were inferior to the emperor. There really wasn't anybody that women were superior to. And so this kind of systematized patriarchy in a way by giving it a sort of cultural belief system justification, right? And so, moving on, continuing, what were the effects of Confucianism on Chinese society? We also see that Confucianism, which celebrates this age-old vision of China of the past, does so by placing a large value on history. And so, when we look at this and we see what was Confucius trying to do when he came about during this era of warring states, putting forth this belief system that was said to kind of restore the glory days of China, it makes sense that you would nostalgize or look to the past and place emphasis on studying it. And then I raised this point yesterday, but it is very important. And the idea of social mobility is one that we're going to talk about a lot in this particular course, right? Along with these buzzwords like egalitarian, which means equal, right? Or patriarchy. Social mobility means the ability to be born within one layer of the social pyramid, but through a variety of different things, you can actually rise up. In some belief systems, most notably Hinduism, social mobility really isn't possible. But in a Confucian society, social mobility is possible because it places such a large emphasis on kind of moral leadership, right? And so leaders were of great character, not necessarily the son of, a ruler or a king. If the son of a king did not lead righteously and morally, then according to Confucius and Confucian beliefs, that person should not rule. And so because leaders were of great character, right? How did you learn how to be of great character, to be, and represent the values that Confucius is preaching? And the answer to that was school. Now, these imperial academies, right, that were designed and built by the Han Dynasty in order to train members of the government, right, in all the things they would need to know to be righteous, moral leaders, they built these schools, and even though technically anybody could attend, the reality was is that schooling was expensive, right? And so, really, it was still largely closed to the poor. What you did sometimes find is small Chinese villages would pool their money together and basically look there and say, you know, hey, let's take Blanca. Blanca appears to be, of great ability, and she shows a lot of leadership. She's real smart, and I really should have used a boy because girls would never have been permitted, but we're gonna run with my metaphor anyway. Blanca is just so smart and shows so much leadership. What if we all pool our money together and send Blanca to school, and then once she gets a position in the government because of her Confucian education, then she can come back and serve us, right? And help our village. And so this did open social mobility into Chinese society that you could be born poor and through education rise to the Chinese government, which was a very important place. Another effect of Confucianism in Chinese society was the confirmation of the mandate of heaven, right? The mandate of heaven had been around since the Shang dynasty. The idea that the Chinese ruler was in power because the heavens were favoring them, right? And that it was meant to be. And that, as long as you ruled justly and morally, right, then you would maintain the mandate of heaven, right? The leader's job was to take care of people, provide justice, be a benevolent ruler, right? Keep taxes low, satisfy. And so, when the leader would deviate from this, right? Or they broke the mandate of heaven, they broke the deal, and a new dynasty was invited in, right? And so this becomes a real base, kind of an adaptation to this mandate of heaven view that the ideas of Confucianism would justify it, right? The leader rules with great moral leadership. If the leader stops being of great moral leadership, the mandate is broken and a new dynasty should take over. And then lastly, we also see that Confucianism had a huge impact on Chinese society by kind of welcoming in this strong focus on the secular world. Now, we already said secular means non-religious, and that makes sense for Confucianism because in Confucianism, Confucius is not a god, right? There's no focus of an afterlife. It's really not very religious at all, right? It is a philosophy, it is a belief system on how we should organize this society and how we should act. And so, as this caught on, we really saw a movement away from kind of China's more spiritual backgrounds of ancestor worship, and some of the beliefs of like heaven and where the mandate of heaven and the son of heaven came from, and really pulling away from that and kind of focusing on this world, right? Relationships, effective government, strong moral leadership, social harmony, not the heavens or the afterlife. Now, the last of the Chinese belief systems that we're going to look at, we looked at legalism and Qin Shi Huangdi. We looked at Confucianism. The last one is this man right here with the eyebrows, which are pretty righteous and quite amazing, in fact, right? This is Lao Zi or Lao Tzu, depending on the translation. And like Confucianism, Taoism emerged during the period of warring states. Lao Tzu, like Confucius, was a government official. In this sense, the 6th century BCE, right smack in the era of warring states when China was divided and kind of separated from itself. And along comes this guy named Lao Tzu who is essentially doing the same thing as Confucius, right? Putting forth a solution to this era of disunity, of disharmony, right? And so Lao Tzu comes along and begins writing, and the most influential poem of his work was called The Way and Its Power. And we always want to say it that way, the way, right? Because Taoism is a very mystical and almost very nature driven, like sort of like the hippie version of the Chinese belief systems. And then, like a good hippie, yeah, Lao Tzu and his eyebrows sort of disappeared one day and just abandoned society and disappeared off into nature, never to be heard from again. Right, and so you think like, okay, this hippie is writing these poems and advocating for a way out of the warring states, but then he disappears naked into the woods, and we're all just going to forget about him. But just like Confucius, right? After he dies or after he disappears, his beliefs begin to be written down and codified and ended up being incredibly influential to some of the Chinese philosophers which followed him. And so let's talk about what Taoism believes. And when we look at Taoism in East Asian art or East Asian society, we see it a lot reflected in imagery, right? And when we look at this imagery, I'd ask you, where is the focus? And if you looked at this picture and you said, well, the focus seems to be on nature, right? The landscape, the mountains and the trees. And I said, well, what is the focus not on? You might say the person, look how small they are, look how like, marginalized and up in the upper left hand quartile of this image, right? Nature is the focus and the man is small. And I think that really exemplifies and why we see in so much East Asian imagery kind of this focus on nature, right? And so fundamentally, we need to start with this idea that Taoism is at its heart sort of the opposite of Confucianism, right? Whereas Confucianism argued for, strong government and not strong government like legalism, but, strong government and schooling. Taoism is arguing that both of these things are artificial and that these things, these artificial constructs, are actually leading us away from our most natural selves, and that the way out of the warring states chaos period was to get back closer to nature. We have let ourselves become distracted from who we are naturally meant to be. And so Taoists and Laozi advocating is this belief in the way or the Tao. And the Tao is this idea, right, that everything on this planet is governed by the principles of nature, by the energy of nature, right? And that simplicity and natural living and focusing on this and not allowing ourselves to be distracted or separated from nature will bring us back into harmony and peace will follow. Consequently, if you're really focusing on nature and simplicity, then small government is going to be what you want, right? And so the large Confucian based civil service academy trained governments of the Han Dynasty would be in direct contrast to what Taoists would argue that all of that is unnecessary. We need a very small government to kind of keep us safe, and really, the heart of our society should not be the government, it should be our small, self sufficient communities where we farm and we live simple lives. We abandon education because it's not necessary, and everything we need could be kind of gotten from nature and from our parents and in just like simple living, and that this return to this period of nostalgize the Shang dynasty and pre-Shang dynasty was what was going to reunify the Chinese state and bring us together. And so now we do the same thing that we did for Confucianism, right? Like, how did Taoist beliefs affect Chinese society? Because just like legalism and just like Confucianism, Taoism continues to have a role to play in the Chinese cultural identity even in the year 2020. And so, even as it exists as the fundamental opposite of Confucianism, it's actually looked at within Chinese like scholars in Chinese cultural circles that it is kind of the polar opposite of Confucianism to the point where it's actually a complement, right? And this becomes exemplified by the image of the yin yang, right? And most of you probably know them because you used to draw them on your binders when you were in second grade and learning how to draw all that stuff. And the yin and the yang, right? The black teardrop and the white teardrop. They are exact opposites of each other and meant to represent this idea of complementary opposites, right? That these complementing opposites, when in harmony, actually are perfect together. And so the idea was, within Chinese society, where both Taoism and Confucianism lived, that you would be Confucius at work, right? Confucianist at work, where you would defer to the moral and just leadership of your superior. And then when you're at home, you should be kind of in that simplicity and harmony with nature. And so in your outward facing world, you are relying on the five relationships to provide order to society. But then when we retreat to our houses and our personal lives, we are in harmony with nature and living simple lives. Another thing that we see within Taoist circles and Taoist beliefs is this belief of this energy in nature and this interconnectedness, that the trees and the birds and the plants and us are all linked by this energy, the Tao, right? And very magical kind of idea, right? That this sort of magic and energy um, could be harnessed, and that when we were in harmony with nature, that you could tap into the power of the Tao to do great things. And this belief in small government and magic and simplicity actually was the basis of quite a few government uprisings. The most famous was the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which was motivated by Taoist ideas and kind of tapping into the magic of Taoism. We're going to leave off here on today's lecture at 14 minutes, not 15, and pick this up most likely on Friday.